Matt Martin here, but Dave King is out. Sitting in for Dave is Matt Crow, and we're going to go directly to the phones with Scott Braddock. Scott, how are you doing today?
Good morning, dueling Matts, or Matt Squared.
Yeah, Matt. Yeah, it's the Matt and Matt show, I guess.
Matt and Matt in the mornings.
But Scott Braddock is the editor of the Quorum Report, and man, we've got all kinds of news going on right now.
Yes, sir.
We've got Beto O'Rourke, apparently. So we were talking about it yesterday, and yesterday when we started the show, I was like, you had a letter that apparently went to El Paso, and he was officially announced. And then by the end of our show, he was officially announced.
Right.
With a YouTube video or something.
Right, and as all this is played out, O'Rourke has done a very good job, I would say, just, from a political analysis standpoint. He's teased this out to where they couldn't tease it no more. For a while it was like there was an announcement that there would be an announcement about an announcement, and at some point there would be an official announcement. One thing after another. But I think it started to wear thin with some people. It's hard to second-guess the guy because, he did move the needle so much in Texas last year. But now he's officially on the playing field, and the questions are rolling in. Just yesterday, he was asked the question about when he's going to release his taxes. He said that he would, and he says he'll announce that at some point. I see a New York Times headline this morning that says, in the Beto O'Rourke announcement, the YouTube that you mentioned, in the announcement, his wife's silence stands out. That's the story in the New York Times. Somebody said that, by the way, that the wife is the daughter of the billionaire father-in-law, so it's usually that the ventriloquist does not. They don't look like they're speaking. Yeah, that was one of the that was one of the criticisms that somebody
the
leveled.
hand behind the puppet,
right.
huh?
Yes, and so now O'Rourke is on the national stage. He's being asked a lot of questions by the national press. Remember, as soon as you actually do announce, when the official announcement comes, that's when the national media starts to really home in on that person, start to try to vet them. There is a headline in the Wall Street Journal this morning about the fact that O'Rourke, when he was first elected to Congress back in 2012, he did that largely with the help of Republican donors, a lot of them from Houston, and some prolific Republican donors here who have been some of the same contributors behind Texans for Lawsuit Reform, which is not exactly a liberal group. So you can expect folks like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren to seize on things like that. It was reported last year as he was running for Senate against Senator Cruz that Republican donors had helped him originally in his first campaign for Congress, but that didn't really matter that much because O'Rourke didn't really have a spirited primary, against another Democrat that anybody had ever even heard of, and now he will be in a field of Democrats who are talented people, and they're going to point at these things.
So one of the things, I don't know if you heard the news coming on, but one of the things they were pointing to is that Bernie Sanders was able to, within the first 24 hours or so, get $6 million. Is Beto O'Rourke going to be able to fundraise effectively enough for a national campaign?
It's a great question. I was looking at the numbers from the Senate race last year, and as you know, he raised about $80 million for the race against Senator Cruz.
But that was from all over the U.S., right? It wasn't just Texas donors.
That's right. So they would say, and his campaign last year would stress that most of the donors were from Texas. But yes, there were contributors from all over the United States. And these were contributors much like the Bernie Sanders model, where you have people who are giving $5, $10, $25, or small donors, and not those who are giving, not those who are writing big checks, going up to the limit on how much you can spend. But in looking at the numbers across the country, here's how he stacks up against other folks. Just one example. He was the top fundraiser, for anybody running for Senate last year. Number 2 was Claire McCaskill, who unsuccessfully ran for re-election in Missouri. While he raised $80 million, she only raised $30 million. I mean, that's the difference between how just how prolific he was versus how other candidates were able to raise money. A couple of important things about having small donors. Number one, if somebody's giving $5 or $10, that means they can do it again. One of the reasons he got so much money is because each of those contributors could do that, more than once.
Yeah, on a monthly basis.
Not that much. Right, they could do it every couple of weeks if they wanted to, or they could do it every week if they wanted to. But it also means that those people who are doing that are the ones who are not just going to contribute, but those are absolutely your voters. People who are going to not only vote for you, but also tell their friends to vote for you, and write that on their Facebook page and tweet it out and all that sort of stuff.
They have those
really activated
Beto stickers running around on
their
cars.
The Beto stickers everywhere. Remember, last year there were a lot of folks who were Republicans who were sort of freaked out about the fact that it seemed like the Beto swag, if you will, the stickers and the signs and all of that, they seem to be everywhere and in places you might not expect, like the suburbs, like Williamson County here near Austin, or Montgomery County, or Collin County, Denton County, etc. And people were asking, well, what is Cruz doing? Well, he did go on to win, of course, but he moved the needle in such a huge way. 5 years ago, every Democrat in Texas who was running statewide lost their races by 21 points, every one of them. And if you look at what happened last year, O'Rourke was able to close that gap down to 3 points. So when there are folks who ask, why is everybody so excited about this guy, or so many people excited about this guy who lost his race, to move the needle that much is absolutely significant.
Well, and Scott, let me ask you this, because is this something that is going to last in Texas? I mean, you know that it has been moving that direction, at least for a while, but is this something that Beto O'Rourke was able to get the people out and just actually get them to the polls, or is this something that we're going to see a lot now that they know that they're out there, they've got a chance, we're going to see them out there voting?
It seems like they will be. Of course, it's a $1,000,000 question. I mean, who knows the eventual answer? But these people seem to be activated. They seem to be excited. But a national Democratic primary is very different from running a general election.
Yeah, Scott, what you're saying basically is without Ted Cruz, there's no Beto.
Well, I think that there's a lot to that. There was a lot of anti-Cruz sentiment, right? I mean, and I've said it this way a few times, but I'll say it again. It's a special kind of person who you agree with everything they're saying and you still don't like them. And that was the problem for Cruz with for Cruz with a lot of Republicans. In fact, you remember Jerry Patterson, the former land commissioner, very conservative guy, the father of the modern gun rights movement in Texas. He had said that he was going to vote for Cruz, but when he did so, he told a reporter that he hit the button for Cruz, then he walked out of the booth and put his finger down his throat and threw up.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where I wouldn't want to take a long train ride with either of them, O'Rourke or Ted Cruz, because I'd jump off the trestle at the first opportunity. But I got to say though that I think you put your finger on it. I think Ted is not a warm and fuzzy guy. He just isn't. And O'Rourke comes on, like the dude at the bar, talking to you and so on and so forth. But I just, as you said, how is that going to play in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina?
Now, but the thing that I was going to say, but the thing that gets me with this, or that should, I think, scare the GOP a little bit, is that it wasn't just Ted Cruz. You had Paxton, and you had Patrick, and a lot of those guys that maybe aren't quite as popular as the governor were all having problems with their elections, even against people unknown that aren't as known as Beto O'Rourke.
Yeah, unknown Democrats. You have what I think is a Beto effect, and and Cruz effect also. There were a lot of Republicans who would privately say that Cruz was costing them a lot of votes because of what y'all just said. He's just not a likable guy, and he had taken some positions that Republicans genuinely did not agree with. Remember, you had Cruz who refused to, at first, go along with the Trump candidacy because, Cruz, to his credit, he was the other man standing when it was down to Trump and Cruz. But at the Republican National Convention, Cruz was, and have you ever seen this, where a guy gets a standing ovation as he's walking out on the stage, and then they almost boo him off the stage because he would not endorse the ticket, and then he still wouldn't endorse the ticket for a while. And then there were those folks who still respected and were hanging with Cruz because he was still a never Trump person, and then he finally gave in and endorsed the ticket, and at that point, those people left Cruz for a while because that was the one reason they were still hanging with him.
It's a weird cycle.
Yeah, so it was a very weird cycle, very, very strange thing. But I think that Cruz, for the most part, made up with Republicans, but independents were still questioning him.
So I know Beto is always interesting to talk about, but there was one thing you sent us a list, and one thing I really wanted to ask you about was this: the Senate is looking at potentially taking $4 billion out of the rainy day fund. I know the rainy day fund has a lot of money in it, but when you start putting that into the budget, it's going to be hard not to do it the next year and the next year until it's gone. What exactly are they wanting that $4 billion for?
Well, it's a great question, and you had conservative groups, asking the senators to vote against this, what they call supplemental budget. At the beginning of the legislative session, what happens is the legislature, and imagine this, guys, this is how the way Texas government works. They'll write a budget that is for 24 months, but actually they will base it off about 19 months' worth of revenue. Mm-hmm. So what they actually do is, in the beginning of the session, is they'll pass what they call a supplemental budget, basically to cover the hot checks they wrote 2 years ago. And so when you look at what happened in the meantime, and this was Senator Paul Betancourt, a Republican from Houston, very conservative. Sometimes he's referred to as the assistant lieutenant governor to Dan Patrick. Betancourt had said, look, we had a hurricane, we had a school shooting, and we have to respond to that with more security at our schools, and a few things that are what he would describe as one-time expenses. But if you look at what the Senate is doing in the proposal to raise pay for teachers, which we've talked about here on the program, that expenditure, which was not in this supplemental budget but is something that they support, that's $4 billion also. And that would absolutely be an ongoing expense. And keep this in mind, of the $9 billion surplus that's been laid out for the next 24 months, that teacher pay raise accounts for 44% of it. And that's sort of tying the hands of future legislatures, because what happens in 2 years or 4 years or 6 years if you don't have a surplus? Does that mean that future legislatures would have to make the very tough decision to take back those teacher pay raises? That would not go very well, but guys, you can imagine it, in Austin, sometimes it's the here and now, and we're not thinking as much about what's going to happen down the road. Okay,
well, Scott, we're running out of time, but what's going on the Quorum Report right now that you want to highlight?
Well, we do have a special feature right now about exactly what's going on in the Texas Senate. You may remember that 2 years ago it was sort of built for speed, and every single bill that was considered a conservative bill made its way through the upper chamber very quickly at the behest of Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. It seems like his power is fading because of the election results this past November, where 2 Democrats picked up seats. It's changed the dynamic completely. We got the whole breakdown for you on exactly what is stalled out right now,
and
including
don't forget
property tax reform. That's right, and the Seliger meltdown, the public shaming of Kel Seliger by Lieutenant Governor Patrick. It all factors in. You can check it all out. QuorumReport.com. You can also sign up for our free emails there.
All right. Thank you, Scott, for coming on. Again, Scott Braddock, editor of the Quorum Report, every Friday here at 8 o'clock. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Matt and Matt.
All right. You have a good day.